If you've ever tried to implement and automate a process for employee onboarding and offboarding, you'll know it's not an easy thing to get right. Hi, I'm Andy Jones and I'm really excited to introduce the first video launching IntuneHRFlow. Last year I created an onboarding power automate flow and there was lots of great feedback and interest. So this year I decided I wanted to take the challenge further. In this first video I'll take you through what the tool is and what it does. But stay tuned for the series where I'll go through how this solution is built. So what is IntuneHRFlow? Well, it's essentially a comprehensive Microsoft-focused solution using a long list of products such as Intune, Azure, SharePoint, Entra ID, Office 365, Forms, all integrated together using Power Automate. Power Automate flows alone are great, but IntuneHRFlow looks to take this further by empowering the people actually owning the process. I started creating this tool following many conversations with customers where it was apparent that there is still a need to automate and simplify both onboarding and offboarding. Some companies are still using fragmented and time-consuming solutions and even spreadsheets and basic online forms. If we think about the modern workplace and how it's changing, there's a definite shift into a cloud-first state, particularly using Intune. Now obviously there's a long list of great employee lifecycle products out there to choose from, like Workday, Bamboo HR, Deal and Rippling, just to name a few. But let me emphasize this, these will cost you more money on top of your existing investment. Naturally, they do support more holistic HR functions like rewards, payrolls and appraisals. But with the solution here, this puts you in charge and allows you to integrate with these systems if you use them. That's why I decided to create a tool you can use and put your existing investment to work, while also automating IT functions using Entra ID and Intune as your MDM platform. I didn't want to stop there though. Asset management is closely tied to the lifecycle management of devices combined with Intune. So I built an integrated asset management process that stores not just Intune registered devices, but allows HR or IT to record extra information. That might include assignment of monitors, printers, peripherals, just other things, meaning everything is recorded in one place. Two other features introduced include requests for applications and admin rights uplift for Windows. But what sets this apart, I think, is having all the records presented using SharePoint, providing a common platform and easy to use interface. This means HR staff as well as IT can view progress and status without having to log in to Intune or Azure. On top of this, I've added a number of reports for devices, licenses and applications, making sure the right people are kept up to date, and you can even track the workflow of actions using a workflow tracker. So with that, let's take a look at the features on offer. So starting off, we're going to have a look at SharePoint first, right? And there's two sites that need to be set up. Firstly, by using one of the templates that's already in SharePoint, you need to set up your own employee new starters. Now, like I say, there's a really good template in here that you can use. And this gives you all information about start learning, resources and checklists. But you may already have your own starter or onboarding journey site yourself. So you can use that if you need to. There's no restriction there. If I go back to the home site here, basically I'm going to go into the site that's the surface or user interface to IntuneHRFlow. And this is where we kind of do our customization. Now I do have a home page. This is basically giving us a launch pad for either HR or IT. So by clicking the link, for example, here, it's going to give us the forms to fill in. This is the starting point, right, of where a HR consultant would put the information in for our new starters. So this is one of the entry points that HR staff would get involved. The other key form that can be filled in is the employee offboarding. So basically what you'd need to do is make sure you lock this down so the right people could gain access. You don't want the wrong people gaining access, and this Intune IntuneHRFlow site is basically private, and it will add the respective managers access and the HR people as needed during the flow process. So let's look at some of the key lists. What we've got is a number of lists that have been added, all right, and these are constructed specifically to work with Power Automate. If we look at the onboarding list here, we've got a selection of data which is basically going to capture all the information, but it's also going to be used as a reference point. So you've got the names, you've got their email addresses, you've got the status of where they're at in that onboarding process, and whether it's a new joiner or leaver. If we look across here, we've got information, for example, their title and user persona, which I'll go into in a little bit. You will need to add in their employee number and select from a choice the department. Now that department can be determined by what departments you have within your organization. You can change that individually. If I just have a look at the settings here, for example, I've got a number of choices. You can add to those as you see fit. Quite critical, obviously, is the start date. We've got other information such as the nickname and the manager, which is a selection on the form. So you can actually type a username in and it will bring back the data that's already registered within Entra ID. Now, some of the information on here isn't needed as part of the initial form and is used later on, depending on what kind of package and flows that you're implementing. For example, PC, it's got a list of the devices that the person has. This is what hooks into the asset management list that we'll have a look at. And importantly, you have things like information where it's going to have your notifications to end user. It's going to have the update, so as the flows run, it's going to tell you whether it's onboarded or not, and also things like Windows 365. During the onboarding process, does the user need a Windows 365 deployment? It may be that there is a delay in hardware being delivered, so you can choose that as a quick option to get your end user up and running quickly. For example, it's set as yes here, and there's a reason. So this is the key list, and a new record will be unique to every user that you onboard. So taking a look and moving over to offboarding here, a similar process is followed. There's a form associated with this list. I can go into forms here and open it up. Okay, and if I look at the preview, it's going to give me all the input fields. Again, it's not all the fields that are available on the list, but it's the key ones that you want to provide to HR to fill in as part of that process. Now this form can be published. Again, what I recommend is that it's published in a secure area, so only HR people who know what to do, what fields to fill in, and they're not going to randomly create records which will mess up your flows. So that's quite crucial that only the right people have access. Next, I want to go into Asset Manager. In the intro, I talked about asset management. Now the records that are surfaced or added into this specific list are those that are taken from Intune, so they're Intune enrolled devices. If I go over to Intune and I have a look at devices here, you can see I only have two. If I look at all devices, I've got this Andy developer and iPhone, so they're two different types and OSs. And if I go back to my list, you can see it's replicated. There's a specific Power Automate flow that will check what devices have been added and actually populate this list. If during a daily flow the device isn't updated, it records it and then it will append a status of remove. So it's basically picked up that the device no longer exists in Intune, but you've still got a record, right? So you need to check back on a specific user or the status of a device. So clearly, if there's quite a few records in here and it becomes confusing, what you can do is create different views. I've not gone and created a number here, but it's very easy to do, and anyone familiar with SharePoint list will be able to do that. So you can group depending on, say, user or device type, for example. And if you want to, you can highlight a record and delete it. But that raises an important point in that really you should only allow people access to these lists that know what they're doing, so they don't randomly delete something. Now, in unison to all of this, what we have is a workflow tracker. And during all the Power Automate flows, what you're going to do is get a track record of which flow is run and what status the workflow is at. We have a number of emails that get sent out for approval to managers and IT teams in order to set their approval. For example, if the user needs a Windows 365 device, that requires a license, so you might want to send that out to a manager to approve first. And it's only complete when the status says it's complete. When it's pending, it means effectively it's out for review. We have the other lists here. We've got the app request, for example. This is where a specific HR or IT person has gone on and made a request, or you might want to open this out to end users, where they can select a specific application. They have to choose from a selection of applications already published and packaged within Intune. Now, I've prefixed these with IHF. If I go on to Intune and I go into groups, if I look at all the groups and I look at IHF, you can see I've got two groups. Now, these groups are basically those that are assigned to the applications package within Intune. So if a user is requesting access and it's approved by the manager, they get assigned automatically to these groups, and these groups will then automatically deploy the application down to the end user on their device. And lastly, I want to look at the documents here, because I've automatically created a document library, and this document library is going to house all the migration of data from end users as they are offboarded from the organization. So it will go through and it will pick up the files within their OneDrive and it will take a copy. As you can see here, it's just copied a couple of documents. Now, when a user is offboarded and they're basically locked out and the license removed, Office will keep those files available for a period of 90 days. But before that happens, we want to take a copy. And after that, you can decide to delete that folder with all the files included after a period of time. The last list I want to show you here on IntuneHRFlow for SharePoint is this quite important one, which is the Automate settings. Now, some of these fields are blurred out, and the reason for that is because this is a list that's going to contain all the common settings that you're going to call upon within your Power Automate flows. So it's got some key information. For example, it's got the site, it's got this actual home site there for your IntuneHRFlow site. It's got the names of the actual lists. So where you have the list down here on the left hand side, onboarding, offboarding, it's actually going to give that name because it's going to draw on those lists and it needs that name to do it within Power Automate. I've also got key information regarding the tenant, the client ID and application secret. Now, these are important fields taken from the application registration within Azure. The reason we need to do that I'll get into in another video, but essentially we're going to use these details in order to run HTTP requests against Entra, and standard Power Automate flows don't allow us to do that, so we're going to create this application registration. Other details we have here, like the report group, this is effectively the distribution group where anyone that wants a report from IntuneHRFlow will be added into that distribution group. But this is the name that's created. Moving further along, we've got some information about the site. For example, the SharePoint members and the document reference library are details about those particular lists and the document library. These are key index points to allow us to make decisions about what access we allow users to have. Is it an owner or is it a member, so they can only view information? If you remember earlier, we talked about the security levels and only allowing the right people access. So this is one of the ways in which you achieve that. Again, we've got a reference to documents here. That reflects the name of the documents or the actual document library that we've got. Then we've got other information like the object ID of the Windows 365 group within Intune. So as you can see here, we're building up a picture of variables that are commonly used across our Power Automate. This is quite an important list that is reused multiple times, and you only need to create it once. I've added a form here so that you can go in and set this up as part of your initial setup. So with that, let's go over and have a look at the Power Automate flows. So here over on Power Automate, which you log on with, make.powerautomate.com, you're going to need a premium license for Power Automate to run some of these. Not most of them, but there are some flows that need the premium account. Now what we have here is, you can see on the screen, is a list of flows that's basically breaking down the functionality of IntuneHRFlow to automate what's going on in the background, and it's taken a logical approach. That's what the numbers are for. So we got 1, 2 and 3, for example, which are all about onboarding. Now if you go through a logical life cycle, you would do onboarding, kind of in life management, and then offboarding, right? So that's the way this is broken down. But to make this easy to understand, and within the flows, we'll have a look at one. Basically, I've included some way of testing and basically surfacing information, so you can easily change this if you need to. Now these flows also are generally run on a schedule. And I've tried to create that from a logical point of view in terms of how long they would take to run. So kind of starting in the morning and then working through the day, and they will run effectively once a day. There are also some other flows in here which relate to the reports. So let's have a look at those. We've got two here, right? So the weekly license report and the weekly Intune apps report. There are some other flows in here which are automatically instantiated. Basically, a new starter, for example, when someone puts in the data for a new starter, we want to make sure we can reformat some of that information so that it correctly gets added, because we don't, for example, necessarily want to create a user account that's all in uppercase, right, that then gets added to Intune. So we want to reformat that into a logical way of reading. So let's have a look at a flow and we can show some of the details here. If I go into edit, I can see that essentially what we've got here, this is a reoccurrence. So it's basically say this is going to run once a day, for example. Now you can go and change your time zone and the starts as you see fit. I've also got this get site settings, which is effectively going to link into the automate settings list that we went through earlier on. This is going to pull those common variables, so information that I need, for example, for the names of the lists on my SharePoint site, but also the variables I need to log on with a HTTP request for an app registration to gain access to end user information, their names, their profiles, their folders, for example, and general information that a Power Automate action from the library doesn't provide. In those cases, I need to use a HTTP request. I don't have a HTTP request within this action. Now, just to highlight, as I mentioned before, I'm actually creating a number of variables, right? Now, this might not be the standard way of doing things, but I've tried to approach this in a way to help you understand the data that's coming through, the data that's been pulled in, and also you might want to change this, right? You might have different variables that you want to add, but you want to actually test what information is coming through this cycle. And I've tried to name them accordingly so you can gain information on the logic of this flow here as well. We're using some standard constructs. For example, we've got the parsing of access. We've got the creation of records back into our SharePoint, for example, where we've got the JSON that's setting the variables and using the information that we're setting earlier as inputs. And then things like setting up the email response, right? So this is where we're going to create and notify our users, our HR, or the requester, or the IT teams, so we can get information out to them and they're duly notified. Now we're going to go into detail into the Power Automate flows in a different video. This is just to give you an overview of the sort of things that's in here and give you an idea of the format. Okay, so again, we're breaking it down into logical tasks. We're numbering them as well into logical steps, and then we're scheduling these throughout the day. Or they may be a weekly task, in which case they'll run once a week, or they're kind of formatting. Thanks for joining me in this introduction video of IntuneHRFlow, and hopefully you can see some good features in there that you could implement yourself. I will release this generally once we've been through an update cycle with private preview registrants, and details for those will be going out soon. If you do want to get involved though, please head over to my website and get your name on the list. But for now, thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon.